Oh, hello and welcome to the first Mix webinar. This webinar will focus on an extremely important aspect of developing to Mix. Now, it may be the case that your current business plans only require integration to one or two of our available Mix DMSs. And today we're going to dive into why it is important to develop against the Mix platform holistically. My name is Brant Keener. I am a Mix developer. With me today is Phil.
Hi guys. Phil Taylor here. I'm the VP of Engineering at Motive.
And so Phil's going to help field any questions that you guys may have. And speaking of questions, you'll notice that Zoom has a QA feature. If you do have any questions, feel free to add them to this QA section of Zoom, and Phil's going to work through those as he's able. The questions may be answered either in the QA section or verbally, depending on the particular question. So from time to time, Phil might have to interrupt me, but that's okay. Great. So before we get into recommendations for implementing Mix, it is worth spending a few minutes to talk about what Mix is and why we built it. And then we're going to go into the nuts and bolts of the webinar. Really talk about how to best implement Mix. There's also going to be 3 quick practical examples to really suss out why it is important to develop first to the Mix standard, and then to really consider it as the gateway to our many DMSs. Now, once again, it's worth reiterating that as time permits, we will have a Q&A at the end, but any and all questions are welcomed at any time during the presentation. Great, so our charter, it's really very simple. But what is it that really drove us to develop Mix? So as you can see, there's a multitude of reasons, and I won't read them out loud to you. But we've been in the business of integration for over a decade. And during that time, we've seen over 1,000 integrations. Now, some of these integrations were easier or more straightforward or more robust. But at the end of the day, what we witnessed was point-to-point proprietary integrations over and over and over and over again. And so there simply had to be a better way than develop and maintaining many disparate integrations in production. And now with the COVID outbreak and an accelerated shift of our industry to digital, the industry as a whole is really being pressured to step up and do better when it comes to data and modern APIs. Great, so here's the first of our polls. So what do you believe is the biggest pain point that you or your organization face when it comes to DMS integration? You see that pop-up window? Feel free to select one or many of those pain points that you might be experiencing within your organization.
All right. So reviewing the answers here, looks like we have a pretty wide. Each of these are all seem to be pain points for the industry. Another mention is the variety of different integration methods was sent as a question over as well. So thanks for answering that poll.
Great. Now, most of you in attendance today do subscribe to at least one Mix API. And many of you likely already know that Mix is a collection of JSON REST APIs. Now, at this point, it can be tempting to consider Mix within the context of a single API, for instance, a GET customer for a particular DMS. But Mix is more than that. It's a collection of JSON REST bidirectional APIs for the most common automotive retail data exchange use cases. So for each API, for example, a GET RO, Mix normalizes the data and the backend API requirements of the multiple diverse publishers to present you, the subscriber, with a common optimized integration path to those DMS. In this webinar, we are specifically referring to DMS when I speak of publishers. Great. So as a subscriber to Mix, this means that auto tech companies that wish to integrate with any and all of the backend publishers can do so via one implementation of the Mix API. Let's dive a little bit more into what we mean when we say normalize. Mix takes the unique and distinct backend API requirements of all the DMS in the network and distills them down into a single best-in-breed API. The backend, of course, still exists, and this is where any and all of your data is stored and retrieved. But Mix handles the connection, transformation, consolidation, and even where required, the data cleanup of 90% of the backend services' diverse requirements with a single API implementation. For subscriber integrations, you first develop to the Mix API what we might refer to as the superset, and then, and this is really important, that only after that you layer on any unique requirements that the publishers might have. Now, as mentioned earlier, you may be developing to Mix to gain access to only one or two of the DMS in our network. And it's incredibly important to remember that you are implementing the Mix interface and not a publisher-specific one. To really gain the benefits of the Mix API, it must be implemented first to the Mix standard and not to the publisher-specific requirements. Your immediate requirements may only be for a single publisher. However, we're constantly adding new DMS and even handling the transition of DMS from one version to another. A good example would be Autosoft transitioning from to Go this year from Flex. Now, to be able to quickly and efficiently grow the pool of available publishers you're connected to, you must be mindful of this initial implementation. Now let's weave in a bit of the process of development within the Mix integrator space. And then we'll further investigate why development against the Mix API first is the right choice. The online specifications, what we refer to as the active specs, present you with the Mix API JSON superset. And they also do clarify the publisher-specific nuances. It can be incredibly difficult not to beeline it to the publisher you are considering. Note, however, that fundamentally hardwiring in these specific needs as a basis for your Mix foundation inserts an inherent risk that if you ever did wish to implement a new publisher in the future, you would have significant rework to untangle all your code from the publisher you initially implemented. Thankfully, we've designed the implementation process on Certify to reinforce the Mix first approach. In the planning phase, it's important to review the spec so that you understand what the core of Mix looks and acts like, and then only after this consider those publisher-specific requirements. This insert you see is an example of the Mix active specification. It includes things like the field name, the JPath, publisher usage tags, enumerated values, and rules. And with this full picture, you can then plan your development effort accordingly. As you're designing your Mix implementation solution, don't bypass any of the Mix core requirements in order to accelerate your development towards a specific DMS. All right, a quick analogy we use internally would be that of the ice cream sundae. The Mix API is really the ice cream of the sundae. Now you can set up your sundae with chocolate, think RO, vanilla, perhaps customer, and strawberry, which might be your vehicle inventory. You can have a combination of all of them, but you cannot make your sundae without first dropping the ice cream. The publisher-specific implementation requirements are simply the toppings that layer on top of the Mix implementation. The toppings, and in this case, the publisher-specific requirements, are not foundational and should not be built into the core functionality of your Mix implementation. Don't focus on the sprinkles and neglect to add your ice cream. We also have a robust developer testing toolkit that allows 24/7 access to testing tools and mock services to test and validate the code you're developing. Here we utilize various tools to allow you to check things like proper enums, field names, and even data types. Certification testing is further divided into two distinct phases. In phase one, the testing is centered around that Mix core API code, or what we refer to as the ice cream. These tests are designed to ensure that you've coded your system to Mix first and foremost. Phase one is paramount to a proper Mix implementation. And once again, that desire to shortcut the process will rear its ugly head. But let me stress to you that you absolutely do not want to shortcut at this point, and that following those core specifications and building your systems to the rules and processes being validated in phase one is crucial. So you've completed phase one, and you progress to phase two, where you will start connecting to staging environments and test those DMS specific nuances. It's finally time for you to enjoy those sprinkles. Finally, you hit a successful dealer pilot and you are ready to roll out. Now you've implemented first to the Mix API and then layered on the publisher specific DMS rules and requirements. You have set your development team up for success down the road when it comes time to adding those new DMSs, or even when those DMSs you already utilize work to make changes within their own APIs. Now your team can really focus on closing deals faster without having to rely on development to build out net new integrations. Without further ado, let's discuss some practical examples of why maximizing Mix for all the available integrations makes sense. Our first example here will show that Mix not only has the power to consolidate your integrations, but also to make those integrations more efficient. Now, this approximates the actual workflow of a post RO if you were to integrate directly to one of the DMS within the network. Now, this is only one of the DMS. Consider that each DMS has a unique workflow for posting an RO with different queries and requirements for the integrating party. If you were to integrate outside of Mix directly to the publisher, your development team must now maintain each of these unique workflows. And in this example, and many others like it throughout Mix, Mix has normalized the calls you make to provide you the data you need from the API with a high degree of consistency and efficiency. In this post-RO example, the 7 publisher calls that were required initially were reduced to only a single API call to Mix. Great. So managing DMS releases can also be extremely disruptive. On average, how many times per year does your team have to stop the important roadmap work they're looking at to properly manage these releases? Once again, you'll see that pop-up box with some selections.
Okay. So how many times a year does your team need to interrupt your, your sprints or your planned work? 0 to 5 times looks like it's the abundant winner here. In our experience with the publishers in our network, we average somewhere between 6 and 12 times do we see changes to the backend system, breaking changes to the backend systems that would require you, if you're not implemented through Mix, to update your systems. So great information. Thanks.
So developing to unique DMS, it costs time and money. And this effort could be spent developing products or features on your roadmap, or even other internal initiatives that you might have. And even once the integration is in production, your team still has to manage those minor releases throughout the year, or even worse, major releases, or entirely new DMS versions. There are currently 2 DMS on the Mix network with major releases in their pipeline this year. By providing an industry API that normalizes all the backend systems you integrate to, Mix will effectively absorb 90% of these updates. And only a few fringe unique requirements pass through, and these could likely be handled within a single sprint on your team. So by having the groundwork laid, your sales team moves uninterrupted to close those deals that drive your revenue, as well as keeping development focused on the tasks that bring value to your customers and your business. Furthermore, we leverage not only the exposure across the DMS within the network, but across all of our other proprietary integrations we've certified. We catalog and determine a best-in-breed field definition, both in terms of naming and format. So DMS often utilize different field names for identical data, as well as sending that data via different data structures. Some could use XML and others JSON. Some require only a single call to get that data, while others return a DMS-specific ID that must then be translated by making an additional call to the DMS to translate the identifier into plain text. You see here that field name, data type, and data structure are all normalized into a single mix field name. Now here's an additional example of field name, data type, and format normalization. In addition, unique situations in which, for instance, a field is used somewhat inconsistently. Here, a publisher used a value that would equal the start date unless a particular status was met. For instance, so here Mix will actually take that logic, smooth it out, and handle it behind the scenes so that ultimately it yields data that your dev team knows will be consistent and correct. And in conclusion, Mix brings you a great number of benefits for API implementation. When you start with Publisher 1, you can much more easily add in Publishers 2 and 3 with the Mix API, as neither of these two new publishers will require wholesale code base rebuild. This is without a doubt beneficial to the scaling of your business. Continuing to add publishers easily, as well as shielding and easing the burden on your dev team from constant small and large changes within that DMS. Now, furthermore, if a dealer you service requires switching to a new DMS, your team is already prepared for these changes. And all of this culminates to your team spending less time developing and maintaining your integrations and more time building out the important business features that you really actually want to work on. Well, we really appreciate you joining us today and hope that the importance of a mix-first development strategy was really driven home. We do have a little bit of time for questions, so feel free to submit any questions in that Q&A section, and we will answer them as time permits. If you don't feel that your question has been adequately answered, or you think of additional questions after we've concluded, please submit those to support@motiveretail.com.
Okay, we have a couple questions that have come in. I'm going to answer a few of these live. So one of the questions was, what is the support structure? For example, if a DMS is down, who does our support team have to contact? We here at Motive have a dedicated support team that will provide support and notifications when there's any potential downtime or issues with an upstream publisher. And we will be your initial point of contact for any support you have with the APIs, whether it be on our platform or a publisher question. And another question here, are there any plans to add any of the big three DMS to Mix in the foreseeable future? We truly hope so. We are working, we're talking to the big three and would love for them to participate in our platform. All right, there doesn't look like there's any more questions. Thanks everybody again for joining, and we'll see you on our next webinar.
Thank you all.